Why was the room suddenly silent? Chloe Lefevre stood perfectly still, her arms half raised as the base physician adjusted the hem of her uniform. The silence wasn't about her words. It was about her back, what should have been a standard medical. Clearance had transformed into something else entirely. The SEAL commander, standing in the corner, froze. His eyes locked on the sprawling black ink that spread across her spine, a hauntingly detailed map of Fallujah. Every alley, every kill zone, every safe house marked in symbols only special operations would recognize. The kind of tattoo no civilian would ever dare get. The kind of map you didn't just study, you survived. No one moved, no one spoke, until the doctor finally muttered something about continuing the exam. But in that moment, Chloe knew. It was over, the anonymity she'd worn like armor for months had shattered. She had stayed invisible at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado for exactly 4 months and 12 days. She knew the count. Every day started the same. Before dawn, quiet, controlled. She checked supply manifests, verified loadouts, confirmed airlift weights, always in the background, always forgotten. She didn't mind, or maybe she did, but she learned not to show it. At 26, standing barely 5'4", Chloe looked more like a grad student than a soldier. Pale skin, tight bun, uniform crisp like paper. Nothing about her presence suggested she'd ever held a weapon, let alone dragged bleeding teammates through alleyways while the walls exploded. Around them, Moying, Frenchie, came the same daily voice. Petty Officer Torres, always casual, always smiling, always dismissing her with a harmless joke. "Good morning, Petty Officer," she'd reply, every time, formal, measured, polite, her French accent soft but never uncertain. They didn't see the hours she spent memorizing terrain maps, or the way she analyzed their weapons logs like a surgeon. They didn't know she could field strip Torres's rifle faster than he could, because to them, she was a detail, not a warrior. In the operations briefing that week, Chloe stood at the back like usual. SEALs gathered around digital maps showing new trouble in the Anbar province. Commander Morrison, tall and broad, with the steady voice of someone who had survived everything once, maybe twice, pointed at the terrain overlays. Team Alpha will deploy in 72 hours, recon and acquisition only. No fire unless confirmed. Chloe's heart skipped. She recognized the terrain on the screen before he even named it. That intersection? She'd been shot at there? That alley? She'd used it to evacuate 2 wounded. That rooftop? It was hers once, on a night no one remembered, in a country no one thanked her for. She said nothing, until Morrison's voice cut through her thoughts. "Lefevre, supply requirements, full kit, 8 operators." She nodded, pretending it was just another task, just another gear list. But what she was really doing was scanning the maps again, updating her mental overlays, calculating variables no one knew she was trained to consider, because there was something they didn't know about her. Not yet. She had never belonged at Coronado. Not really. The unspoken rules were clear. Real respect came through deployments, not documents. And Chloe had no war stories. No scars they knew about, just a resume that said logistics and a history no one had bothered to check too closely. And that was by design. She had been trained to disappear, to function quietly, perfectly, to help without being seen, and she was tired of it. But what choice did she have? Every time she asked about advanced tactical training, they redirected her politely. "Those courses are for field operators, your support staff. Don't take it personally." Even when she requested rifle training, not for fun, but because she handled, stored, and shipped them, she was denied. Bureaucratically, coldly, her role was clear. The ghost in the system, the logistician who never made noise, who made things work, then left the room before the real conversations began. And yet, at night, after the base quieted down, Chloe's world changed. She would open the locked footlocker beneath her bunk, the one no one ever inspected. Inside were things logistics officers weren't supposed to have. Tactical reports, recon photos, mission logs from places she'd never officially been, maps drawn from memory, notebooks full of battle strategies written in French, English, and Arabic. She studied everything. She memorized evacuation routes. In cities no one remembered, she tracked enemy movement patterns. She maintained a personal database of regional insurgency behaviors more accurate than any intel report she received. She wasn't playing soldier. She was staying sharp, because once, a long time ago, she'd let herself get soft, and it had cost lives. That mistake would never happen again. Every morning before the sun rose, while the base still slept, she ran. Grueling obstacle routes behind the mess hall, through water, over fences, crawling through drainage tunnels, simulating tight quarters, practicing silence, practicing stillness, practicing survival. It wasn't ego, it was atonement. And yet, when she walked into the logistics room each day, all they saw was the French girl with the clipboard until the sirens hit. It was a quiet Tuesday, the kind where nothing should have gone wrong. Then came the alarm, and everything changed. Team Bravo hit, ambushed in Anbar, 4 wounded, extraction compromised. Radio chatter was chaos. She moved before thinking, snapped on her headset, pulled up maps, not standard maps. Her maps, ones no one else had, ones drawn from memory, experience. Pain, her eyes locked on the building they were trapped in. No, not that building, that clinic. She'd been there before. She remembered the smell, the echo of boots, the fire in the hallways, the wounded girl bleeding in her arms as insurgents moved upstairs. It all came rushing back in the operations center. Morrison was calm, too calm, planning, mapping fire zones, discussing insertion points. But everything they said was wrong. Every suggestion was textbook and deadly. No one saw it but her. No one knew. And in that moment, standing at the back of the room again, she felt the old war rise inside her. The silence, the calculation, the choice. She could say nothing. Stay in the shadows. Or step forward. Risk it all. Reveal everything. Burn the mask she had worn for 4 months and 12 days. Her hand trembled slightly, then she raised it. Commander. Morrison. Sir. He turned, frowning. Supply issues? Her throat dried. No, sir. Tactical. The room fell still again. I have information about the target building. Tactical intelligence. From experience. The air in the room thickened. Morrison stared. Chief Sullivan turned. Operators looked confused, then skeptical. From where? Morrison asked. She hesitated. Then, she told them. And in that moment, everything began to unravel. Or maybe, everything began to make sense. He didn't speak for a moment. Commander Morrison's jaw tightened slightly. His eyes sharp, but not dismissive. Explain. Around her, the room had grown still again. Just like in the medical tent. Only this time, it wasn't about her. Tattoo. It was about her words. Chloe stood straighter, as if bracing for recoil. I was attached to French Special Forces from 2019 to 2021. She said, carefully. Multiple tours. Iraq, Syria, Operation Chanel. Morrison blinked. Chief Sullivan's eyes narrowed. That's not in your file. No, sir, because it was sealed when I transferred to U.S. service. My operational background was sanitized. Officially, I became logistics. That's how they made the transition happen. There was a pause, not from disbelief, but from recalculating. Go on, Morrison said, softer now. Not as a commander dismissing a specialist, but as a soldier listening to another. I've been inside that clinic. I know the tunnels underneath it. We used them for exfil in 2020. The structural layouts aren't on satellite maps because they're service corridors. Maintenance shafts, old emergency passages, but they're there. They're viable. A longer silence. And you're certain? Morrison asked. That there. still structurally sound. Chloe nodded. I kept in contact with local networks after the French pulled out. That building's been used as a medical access point by civilians since the occupation ended. The tunnels were never collapsed, just sealed, but they can be reopened quietly. She didn't say how she knew. Didn't mention the 3 nights she'd spent down there, bleeding, hiding, praying. Didn't describe the child she carried out on her back, or the 2 operators she left behind. That part wasn't for now. Morrison turned back to the screen. He didn't need theatrics. He needed a plan. Map it, he said. And suddenly, the air shifted. She was no longer a background detail. She was now in motion, alive. Chloe stepped forward, brushing past officers who had barely looked at her before. Her fingers traced the display. Main corridor runs here, east to west, about 200 meters. 3 branches. North one is collapsed. Don't use it. Center one goes straight to the sub-level under the clinic, but it's narrow. Could bottleneck. Eastern passage is best. Wider, safer. Emerges 3 blocks outside enemy range. You sure? I'm sure enough to bet my life. Sullivan stepped closer. How do we know you're not compromised? He asked. Why would a French operator with that kind of experience end up counting crates for a SEAL team? Chloe's gaze didn't falter, because sometimes politics values silence more than service. She said quietly, my unit was disbanded, my record erased, but the experience didn't vanish. I just stopped talking about it. Morrison looked down at the map, then up at her again. You want to go in? Yes. You understand what you're asking. I do. She could feel the room shifting from doubt to uncertainty to something close to belief, not because she demanded it, but because her calm wasn't fake. It was earned, one scar at a time. Then the radio crackled. This is Team Bravo. Medical situation deteriorating. Repeat. We are losing blood volume on Operator 3. Immediate extraction needed or we're not going to make it. Morrison didn't hesitate. You're on the team. Get your gear. Sullivan turned, but didn't argue. Not now. Not with lives slipping away. Chloe nodded once, then moved. As she walked out of the operations room, the weight of anonymity fell off her shoulders like an old coat. Her silence had protected her, but now it was time to become dangerous again. Inside the transport hangar, the air was thick with fuel and dust. The Black Hawk engines were whining, and Team Alpha was already kitted up, but their eyes locked on her the moment she approached. She was wearing tactical gear now, the same as them, only her vest was older. Her boots already worn in, like they'd been on long roads no one else in this hangar had walked. You're the French one, Sergeant Marcus Chun said, squinting. She nodded. Chloe Lefevre, you're our nav? Navigation, tactical guidance, real-time interpretation. That building is a maze. I've been inside it twice. You better be right. Chloe looked at him, steady. People I cared about died there. I've been trying to fix that ever since. That shut him up. No one doubted her after that. Not allowed, anyway. They moved fast, strapped in. Final checks, radio syncs, standard pre-mission rhythm, but for Chloe, it was like stepping into an old skin as the Black Hawk rose into the amber twilight, dust trailing in spirals. She closed her eyes. She could feel it again, not the fear, but the clarity. The clinic had a broken courtyard in the back. One wall half collapsed, the other scorched. A decoy entrance. Everyone saw it as useless, except her. She had used it once to survive. Now, she'd use it to bring people out. LZ secure. King Chun's voice as they dropped in low, landing behind a collapsed water plant on the outskirts of the zone. Chloe disembarked quickly, crouched low, heart hammering. It was all muscle memory now. The way her boots gripped the gravel, the sound of insects beneath distant gunfire. The weight of her rifle balanced with the gear strapped across her back. She moved like someone who had never forgotten. Visual on objective, Rodriguez whispered, scanning the street with night vision. Enemy movement, west roof line, Chloe leaned in. We go low. There's a corridor in the back, shielded by debris. That's our entry. You've walked it? Crawled it, bleeding. Rodriguez didn't respond, just followed. They slipped through the wreckage, 6 shadows on broken concrete. She guided them with hand signals, through twisted beams, past burned-out cars, beneath rusted signage. Finally, they reached the outer wall. She knelt beside it, fingers tracing a crack that had once been a doorway. It's still here, she whispered. Help me move this. Together, they cleared the debris, slowly, silently, and then the opening yawned before them. Pitch black, stale air, the smell of rust and old medicine. Chun hesitated. You lead, without a word. Chloe dropped in first. She didn't look back. The tunnels welcomed her like an old, angry friend, narrow, cramped, the walls still etched, with markings left in chalk from years ago. Hers, messages her team used when radios failed. She moved with confidence, every term remembered, every hazard accounted for. They're close, she whispered through the comms. Tunnel narrows at 40 meters. After that, you'll smell diesel. That's your signal we're near the sub-basement. Kowalski, behind her, whispered. You weren't bluffing. She didn't respond because bluffing gets you killed. They advanced in silence, and then gunfire, distant but sharp, rattled above them. Team Bravo was still fighting. She turned to Chun. We need to surface within 5 minutes, or we'll miss the window. We trust you, he said finally. It wasn't an order, it was permission, and that meant more than anything. Tunnel junction ahead. Chloe's whisper cut through the static in the comms. She slowed her pace as the corridor widened into a shadow-choked crossroad underground. 3 directions, each marked only by dust and silence. She paused, lifted. Her fingers pointed left. This way. The team hesitated. Chun stepped forward, scanning her face under dim green NV light. You sure? She nodded once. Central paths too narrow. They'll bottleneck carrying stretchers. North is collapsed from a drone strike back in 21. Left was a drainage bypass. It's viable. I used it before. Her voice didn't waver, not because she wasn't afraid, but because the time for doubt had passed. They followed her. Single file, weapons raised, eyes sharp. But with every step forward, Chloe wasn't just leading them to Team Bravo. She was retracing her own history. That corridor, she remembered crawling through it, soaked in blood, carrying a wounded child on her back, trying to muffle the sound of her own sobbing breath. She had thought that part of her life was buried here. Apparently, it wasn't done with her. Rodriguez whispered behind her. This place gives me the creeps. It should, she said quietly. It's full of ghosts. They reached the ladder. It was rusted but intact, leading up to a service grate embedded. In the sub-basement of the clinic, Chloe climbed first, her movement smooth, silent. She pressed her ear to the hatch, listening. Muffled shouting, gunfire, Arabic, movement, 1 floor up, then silence again. She turned to the team. There, above us. We'll surface behind the old pediatric wing. From there, it's 10 meters to Bravo's position. Chun nodded. We follow your lead. Keep it tight. We're not here to fight. We're here to get them out. Chloe pushed the hatch open. Inch by inch, cool air met her face. She rose slowly, scanning the room. Empty. They moved. The clinic was a shattered skeleton. Broken beds, faded posters of smiling children. Bullet holes in crumbling plaster. It wasn't just a war zone. It was a memory someone had tried to erase. Chloe stopped near a doorway, pressed her fingers to the wall. She remembered this spot. She'd bled here once, bled, prayed, and waited for a team that never came. Not this time. Gunfire cracked above them. Contact. Someone shouted through the comms. Bravo's under assault again. We move, Chun ordered. Chloe led them fast through a back hallway. stepping over debris, ducking beneath twisted metal frames. Then she saw them. The men from Bravo. They were hunkered down in a corner triage room. Blood everywhere. 3 of them alert and fighting. 2 unconscious. Pale as paper, 1 barely breathing. Chloe knelt beside the unconscious man without asking. She pressed her fingers to his neck. Weak pulse. Airway compromised. She said, collapsed lung. If we move him now, he dies. She ripped open her med pouch, pulled a needle. This will hurt, she muttered. The other Bravo operator stared at her. Wait, who the hell are you? She's the reason we're alive. Chun snapped. Let her work. Chloe slid the needle into the man's chest cavity. There was a soft pop, then a gasp. He breathed, barely, but he was breathing. She looked up at Chun. We've got 30 minutes. Max. The plan was surgical. Chloe mapped it out quickly. 1 team would carry the wounded through the tunnel entrance behind them. The others would set a diversion upstairs. Noise, light, something to confuse the enemy and pull their attention the opposite direction. But the biggest problem wasn't the enemies outside, it was the 2 inside. One of the insurgent units had set up a listening post in a room they needed to pass. Any movement, and they'd be exposed, the whole operation compromised. Take him out, Rodriguez said, checking. His mag? No, Chloe said softly. He frowned. You serious? They're in the pediatric ICU, she said. There's a cultural barrier. That space is considered sacred. No violence, no bloodshed. If I enter, dressed like a medic, and speak the right words, they won't stop me. Rodriguez blinked. That's insane. It's worked before. Chun studied her. We lose this window, we lose lives. Chloe nodded. Then I won't lose it. She walked alone, no weapon, just a trauma bag slung over her shoulder. She moved slowly through the half-collapsed hallway, careful to make just enough noise to signal her approach. Not hiding, but not threatening. The 2 fighters inside the ICU turned toward her as she entered. She spoke gently. In Arabic, I'm here for the wounded children. I carry no weapon. May I pass? They didn't lower their guns, but they didn't fire. One nodded. She walked past them, heart hammering in her chest, just steps away, past a broken curtain. She slipped into the next corridor, then signaled the team with a tap on her cums. Clear. Seconds. Later, Team Bravo's wounded were on the move, and no one fired a shot. The exfiltration was brutal. Dead weight, narrow tunnels, steep turns. Chloe guided every step. Her hands steady, her voice calm, even as the man she was carrying bled through his chest wrap. Almost there, she whispered to him. Just hold on. You've got people waiting. Above. Them. The enemy forces were shifting, searching. Radio chatter flared again. We've got movement near the west stairwell, possible breach. It was working. The diversion was buying them time. They reached the final exit. The tunnel curved upward, sloping toward a maintenance hatch that opened near a drainage canal, just out of line of sight. Chun climbed first, scanned, gave the signal. They emerged into night, cool wind, dust, the thrum of chopper blades in the distance. The evac point was only 30 yards out. Chloe pulled the last operator through the hatch herself, her hands shaking, her face streaked with dust and blood and sweat. But she didn't stop. She didn't rest. She ran. Extraction complete, Chun reported into his comms. Repeat. All personnel accounted for. Wounded stable. 0 new casualties. The Black Hawks lifted off, rotors kicking dust and heat across the landing zone. Inside, Chloe sat beside the operator she had stabilized, her hands still pressed over his chest. Keeping pressure on the wound, the medic leaned over. You're not standard field qualified, he said softly. How the hell did you know what to do? She looked at him, weary, and said only, I didn't forget. He didn't ask again. She watched the city shrink below them, lights and rooftops blurring. Into the dark 4 months and 12 days, and finally, someone had listened. The base never slept, but that night it held its breath. The rotors hadn't even stilled when medical teams rushed the wounded away from the tarmac. Bravo's medics shouted vitals. Nurses moved in tight, trained choreography. The stretcher wheels clicked rhythmically over the concrete as the helicopters finally fell silent behind them. But no one moved to debrief Chloe. No one knew what to do with her. She stood at the edge of the pad, gear still on, blood on her sleeves, dust in her hair, watching the life she had tried so hard to keep hidden rise to the surface. Then Commander Morrison appeared. He walked toward her with a look that was part astonishment, part calculation. Staff Sergeant Chung gave his full report. He said quietly, "He called your intel flawless, your navigation surgical. He said you saved lives that would have been lost without you." She said nothing. Her hands were still shaking. He paused, eyes scanning her face. "Is it true?" he asked. "You really spent 3 days in those tunnels?" She nodded. "I was part of a recon unit," she said. "French Task Force 880. We were embedded with U.S. forces. The mission went sideways. Most of my team didn't make it. I stayed behind to keep a wounded boy alive until extraction was possible. The tunnels were the only reason we survived." He didn't speak, just looked at her, as if trying to understand the full weight of everything she wasn't saying. Then he asked, quietly, "Why hide it?" Chloe looked up, eyes fierce despite the fatigue. "Because the people who survived that mission were buried by the ones who didn't." And that was all she said. The debrief happened at 0300. Chloe sat in a private room surrounded by people who'd spent months barely noticing her. Now they were leaning forward, scribbling notes, playing catch-up on a mystery they had walked past every day. Colonel Richards joined via secure comms. "You were French Special Forces, attached to NATO. Operations transferred under sealed orders. Why logistics?" "Because it was the only door left open." She explained what she could, what wasn't classified. The transfer, the scrubbed record, the red tape that had decided she'd be more useful pushing paper than leading missions. They asked about language fluency, cultural intelligence, combat medical experience. She answered with measured calm, but never pride. Because it had never been about pride. It had been about being ready, in your opinion. Colonel Richards asked, "Was the success of the Bravo extraction dependent on your presence?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Why?" "Because conventional planning wouldn't have worked. The tunnels, the cultural barriers, the deception, none of it was on the map. It was lived experience, and experience doesn't get printed in logistics briefings." Morrison exhaled. She had said what they all knew but hadn't dared admit, that someone they had dismissed had just changed everything. The next day, everything was different. Operators who once nodded politely in passing now looked at her like they didn't know whether to salute or apologize. Rodriguez offered her a protein bar at breakfast. Martinez said nothing, but gave a slight nod that felt heavier than words. Sullivan, still skeptical, but quieter now. In silence, people asked better questions, but no one knew what to say. Until Chun found her, he approached her near the motor pool, still in his post-mission uniform, arms crossed. "You weren't on any roster," he said. "No. No recon logs, no ribbons, not even a hint." "No." He paused. "You didn't want recognition?" Chloe shook her head. "I wanted readiness." He studied her, then handed her a patch, a small piece of cloth, weathered, frayed, with the insignia of his unit. "Next time you run tunnels with us," he said, "you wear that." She took it without a word and tucked it into the front of her vest, right where her heartbeat lived. The tattoo came later. 2 weeks had passed. The command had approved a promotion. Her clearance level had changed. A transfer request had been submitted for her to join Special Operations Cultural Advisory Unit, a rare post. Handpicked, mission-specific, and then came the final formality. A full medical clearance for classified assignments. Routine. Expected. She sat in the cold room in silence, arms folded, the medic, one she barely knew, moved through the motions. Blood pressure, reflexes, eyes. Then came the instruction. Remove your shirt. Chloe froze, only a second, maybe less. But it was enough for the air in the room to shift. She slowly pulled her shirt up over her head. Back turned, spine straight. The medic's hand stopped. He didn't speak, didn't breathe. Because on her back, stretching shoulder to hip, was a map. Not inked in vanity. Not art for admiration. A map of Fallujah. Detailed, surgical, intimate. Every alleyway. Every fire zone. Every fallback point. Markings in 3 languages. Tactical. Codes, safe houses, evac zones. It wasn't a tattoo. It was a war memorial. A map for soldiers. One she had carried through 3 countries. Hidden under regulation gear. A memory made permanent in flesh. Commander Morrison, who had entered mid-exam to finalize documentation, stopped in his tracks. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. Dear God. The medic stepped aside. As if realizing he was in the presence of something sacred, Chloe didn't move. This is every known fire point from the Eastern Quadrant, Morrison whispered. These aren't satellite estimates. This is lived recon. Chloe finally turned her head. It's where they died, she said softly. I didn't want to forget, Nan. Even one alley. He stared a moment longer, not at her, but at what she had carried silently across borders and years. You never needed recognition, he said. No, she replied, just to make sure someone got out. Later that night, as the sun fell behind the ridgeline and the base settled into its usual rhythm of fading echoes and quiet repairs, Chloe sat alone outside her quarters. She hadn't spoken since the tattoo reveal. She hadn't needed to. Everyone had seen it now. The permanent proof of what she had never said aloud. It had changed something not just in the base, but in her, all. Those months of moving silently, being passed over, being reduced to the French logistics girl, they no longer mattered, because when the mission came and the lives were on the line, she had been ready, because she had always been ready, and someone had finally asked. 6 weeks after the extraction, the base received an order it hadn't seen in years. All personnel, assemble at the main hangar 0900. Full uniform, no exceptions. Chloe didn't ask why. She already knew. When she stepped into the hangar, the air buzzed with quiet murmurs. Hundreds of personnel stood in formation. Rows of SEALs, medics, pilots, commanders. Logistics officers who'd once barely noticed her now stood at attention, eyes forward. At the front, a podium, behind it, Commander Morrison, Colonel Richards, and standing between them, Major General Patricia Hayes. Her presence meant one thing. This wasn't just recognition. This was history noticing. Today, Morrison began, his voice cutting clean through the stillness. We honor not just operational success, but the power of unseen preparation. The quiet kind, the kind no one applauds until it saves lives. He looked out over the crowd, then back at her. Staff Sergeant Chloe Lefevre stepped forward. Every footstep she took across the hangar floor echoed louder than any medal ceremony. Morrison continued. You joined this unit under a role we thought we understood. We were wrong. When a mission failed, you succeeded. When lives hung by threads, you tied knots, you demonstrated intelligence, fluency, adaptability, and tactical courage that went beyond protocol. Colonel Richards stepped forward with the formal citation. Effective immediately, he announced. You are promoted to the rank of Staff Sergeant. Assigned to Special Operations Cultural Advisory Unit, you were granted access to classified operational planning tiers, with advisory clearance on tactical engagements involving asymmetrical environments. Chloe stood still, let the words fall. The patch, the promotion, the handshakes, but none of it compared to what came next. Major General Hayes took the microphone. Let me be clear, she said. This is not just about one woman doing her job. This is about every time we ignored a quiet voice in the room. Every time we assumed a clean uniform meant inexperience. Every time we confused silence for weakness. She turned directly toward. Chloe, you changed lives, but you've also changed us, and we thank you for both. The hangar broke into applause, real loud, from people who didn't clap unless it mattered. And in the back of the formation, Petty Officer Torres wiped his eyes. He didn't even know why. After the ceremony, Morrison called her into a private room. The door shut, the air shifted. Not commander to subordinate, but soldier to soldier. There's something you should know, he said, leaning forward. Your story has raised questions, across command, across borders. Not everyone likes questions. She nodded. She'd expected that. What kind of questions? The kind that start with, how did we miss this? And end with, who else is like her? He opened a file on his desk, thick, classified. Your Fallujah deployment, the tattoo, the routes you used, some of it lines up with black. Ops reports that were never formally declassified. Missions that don't exist, unless someone lived them. Her eyes stayed calm, and some want to know why you were buried in logistics instead of running operations. She exhaled slowly, because it was cleaner, for them, not for me. He nodded, then paused. You're not in trouble, quite the opposite. But there's interest. Agencies that operate outside traditional chains are watching now. People who see value in the kind of thinking you showed. Cultural warfare, psychological operations, human terrain navigation. Soft kills? She asked, flatly. He didn't answer, because they both knew the answer that night. Chloe didn't sleep. Instead, she sat cross-legged on her bunk, unpacking a box she hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos, not digital, film, bent at the edges, faded with time. One showed her and 3 others, standing in front of the same clinic where she'd just rescued Team Bravo, all smiling. Dust on their boots, exhaustion in their eyes. 2 of them were dead now. The third had never been the same. She turned the photo over. 4 words written in French. Don't forget who died here. She placed the photo beside her, reached for her gear bag, took out a thin roll of cloth, unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a necklace, cheap, threadbare. A child's drawing etched into a pendant. A heart and a stick figure holding hands. She'd received it from the little girl she saved in that tunnel. The one no one knew about. The one who gave her that pendant with shaking hands and eyes too old for her age. The girl hadn't said a word, just pressed it into her palm. Chloe had kept it ever since, not because it was beautiful, but because it reminded her what mattered, that even when you're invisible, what you do still echoes. 2 days later, a transfer order came through. Temporary deployment to Langley for advisory work. Short term, but Chloe knew what it meant. She was being studied, not maliciously. Not yet, but carefully, evaluated, weighed. She was no longer just a logistics specialist. She was a variable, one they hadn't accounted for, a new shape in a system. Built on predictability, she accepted the order. No resistance. Because she had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Before she left, Chun found her again, this time in the weapons maintenance bay. You leaving? Temporarily. You come back? She tilted her head. Do any of us? He grinned. You're still too quiet. She smiled. Quiet is safer. He handed her something. Small, folded. She opened it. A photo of their team, post-extraction, covered in dirt and blood. Smiling anyway. You earned a place, he said. Here, with us. She tucked it into her chest pocket, right over her heart. Then turned to go. Her boots echoed across the bay floor. She didn't look back, because she wasn't walking away. She was walking toward what came next. Why was she trembling? It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The kind that sits in your bones after too many nights staring at a wall. Pretending the silence is sleep, Chloe stood over the map board in the command tent, eyes locked on the satellite. Printouts, There it was again. Checkpoint 17. That cursed stretch of asphalt where all eyes turned into targets and promises turned into graves. 2 missing convoys, no distress calls, no claims of responsibility. Just silence, and silence was never empty. The colonel tapped a marker to the map. 3 possibilities. Roadblock, abduction, or sellout. I want eyes inside by sundown. The room fell quiet. Then someone said it. Send Lefevre. It wasn't even a debate anymore. She didn't speak. Just gave a nod and walked out. Because when the mission smelled wrong, they called her, and she never said no. Checkpoint 17 was a corpse wearing the skin of a boarder. The structures were intact, but the soul was gone. Dust clung to every surface. The radio tower blinked like a dying eye. Chloe approached on foot, cloaked in local garb, face hidden beneath a neutral scarf. Her cover was simple. Liaison, fluent, familiar. But this wasn't reconnaissance. It was a hunt, and she wasn't sure what she'd find. Inside the main post, she found 2 guards, one asleep, one pretending to read a logistics manifest in reverse. She spoke softly. Peace upon your house. The older one looked up, squinted. You again. Chloe nodded. I heard there were questions. He scoffed. Always are, few answers. 2 convoys disappeared. He shrugged. Convoys disappear all the time. No radio signal, no debris. No claim. That's not a disappearance. That's a message. He stiffened slightly, and that was enough. There was fear here, and fear never lies. She walked the grounds alone, looking for small things, discarded rations, drag marks in the dust, scrubbed blood on a wall, and then, behind, a fuel cache. Something odd. A small shoe, child-sized, wrong color for military. She crouched, touched it gently. Dust smeared across her fingers, but it wasn't old. It had been placed recently. She turned around, and the feeling hit her again. Like in the tunnel, like in Langley. The sense that she was standing on a story no one wanted told. She whispered to no one. What did you do? That night, she reviewed the manifest by flashlight. Too many gaps. Names that didn't match. Serial numbers out of sequence. Then, a page folded into the margin. Handwritten, not in English, not in Arabic, in French. She unfolded it. It was a warning. There. Using the roots for more than fuel. They say it's aid. It's not. I've seen what's inside. It was unsigned, but she recognized the handwriting. The woman from the photo. The one they'd said died in silence. She hadn't been silent. She had tried to speak, and no one listened. Until now, Chloe didn't wait for permission. She packed a med bag, a knife, and a locator. Then she walked east, into the hills past the checkpoint, following her gut, following ghosts. 10 kilometers in, she found it. An unmarked trail, tire tracks, blood, drag marks. And at the end, a cave inside. What she saw froze her breath. Not fuel, not weapons. People, dozens, shackled, gagged, some sick, some unconscious. A trafficking route. Right under the command's nose, she stepped forward, hands raised. I'm here to help. A boy, maybe 12, stared at her with hollow eyes and whispered, You came. Her voice cracked. I was late, but I'm here now. She radioed command. Didn't ask, just ordered. Evac needed. 37 survivors. Location pinging now. A long pause then. Under whose authority? Mine, she said, and turned off the radio because authority wasn't about stripes. It was about showing up and not leaving. The evac team arrived at dawn. No questions, no protest. Just quiet professionals doing their job. Eyes lowered, hands steady. One medic leaned close to her after seeing the captives. Who the hell finds this kind of thing? She didn't answer because some questions weren't for asking. They were for remembering. Back at base, chaos, interrogations, denials, investigations opened, and already trying to close themselves. Someone tried to suggest she had acted without clearance. Someone else hinted her report was emotional. Chloe didn't flinch. She walked into the debrief, dropped the evidence, and said, "Doubt me all you want, but ask the survivors." Then she left, because she didn't come for applause. She came for the living, and they were alive. That was enough. That night, she found the girl again, the one she'd given the pendant. 2. The girl sat near the canteen, sketching something on a napkin with charcoal. Chloe approached. The girl looked up, eyes brighter now, and held out the drawing. It was Chloe, standing in front of a group of rescued people, but behind her, a shadow, the shape of a city, a tunnel, a map inked in scars. Chloe stared. The girl whispered, "They said you had a map on your back." Chloe nodded. "I do. Does it hurt?" Chloe smiled softly. "Only when I remember why it's there." Why did Langley always feel colder? Not in temperature, but in tone. Every hallway polished, every eye sharp, every word filtered. It wasn't a place of uniforms. It was a place of masks. Chloe walked through the main corridor of the advisory wing, flanked by 2 silent analysts. No introductions, no welcome, just clearance checks, and then a door. She stepped inside. A long table, dim lighting, a wall of digital maps. Red circles blinked like heartbeats on multiple continents. 5 people sat waiting. The man at the center wore no rank, no insignia, but his presence spoke louder than any title. "Staff Sergeant Lefevre," he said. "We've been expecting you." She nodded. "I was told this is an advisory session." "Not exactly," he replied. "It's more of an evaluation." Chloe didn't sit. Of what? The woman beside him spoke this time. Early 50s, eyes that had probably seen too much. Voice like velvet wrapped around glass. Of how someone like you remained invisible for this long. That was the real reason. Not the tattoo, not the mission, but the silence. They didn't trust what they couldn't monitor. Chloe exhaled through her nose. "Maybe because you weren't listening," the man smirked. "No, we were. We just didn't expect Fallujah to leave a blueprint." He tapped the digital display, a zoomed-in section of her tattoo, uploaded from her medical scans. They had dissected her skin like cartographers, searching for secrets. Was this artistic memory? Or encrypted intelligence? She stared at him flatly. It was grief. He didn't respond, because what could he say? Pain doesn't always wear a badge. The next few days blurred. Interviews, simulations, psych evaluations. She sat in front of war games with redacted overlays and was asked to predict behaviors of foreign combatants based only on building shapes and clothing patterns. She got 92% accuracy. One evaluator said it was uncanny. Another called it operational empathy. Chloe didn't explain that she didn't guess. She remembered, because her experience wasn't theoretical. It lived behind her ribs in the way. Her hands clenched during certain sounds, and the instincts that never quite went quiet. They asked about the child, the one from the tunnels. They knew, of course they did, but she didn't speak. Some memories weren't shareable, not because they were classified, but because language failed them. On the 6th day, they brought her to a secure room. There was no light, just a table and a single object, a black and white photograph. A woman, dead, dust on her face, blood on her collar, a scarf around her neck. Chloe stared. "She worked with you in 2021, didn't she?" The voice asked from the dark. Embedded informant, her intel saved multiple lives. Chloe stayed silent. "She was executed last month," the voice continued. "Someone leaked her name." A long pause. "She trusted someone she shouldn't have." Chloe clenched her jaw. This wasn't an evaluation. It was a test, to see if she'd break. If guilt would sway her, if silence meant complicity. She died trying to keep kids from being trafficked through Checkpoint 17, Chloe said at last. And she never asked for protection, just to be heard. But your systems didn't hear her. "I did." The room stayed still. Then the voice asked, "Would you work for us again?" She looked into the dark. That depends on whether you want someone who tells you what you expect or what you need. They let her go 2 days later. No reassignment, no punishment, no thanks. Just a whispered line from the woman who had first questioned her. Stay ready. They'll come back for you. Chloe knew she was right, and that scared her more than anything. She returned to her forward base just before the rainy season began. Dust turned to mud, gunfire turned to static, and for a while, it felt almost normal. Rodriguez had been rotated stateside. Chung was on secondment with training command. The rest of the base shifted and reshaped like a breathing organism. Always changing, always alert, Chloe resumed duties quietly. This time, not as a logistics officer. Now, she advised, language cues, local rituals, body language anomalies, what wasn't said at a checkpoint, what shadow patterns meant along certain walls. They stopped asking how she knew. They just listened now. But with the respect came another weight, responsibility. If she misread something, people died, and sometimes they died anyway. One night, the call came in, IED at checkpoint Charlie. 3 wounded, 1 critical. Chloe arrived in the med tent seconds after the chopper touched down. She knew the blood, the screams, the smell of metal and dirt and burned flesh. But what she didn't expect was the girl, 16, maybe 17, not a soldier, a local, wearing a scarf almost identical to the one in the Langley photo. Her hands were coated in another man's blood, a Marine she had dragged 30 meters through a blast zone. The medic was shouting, "She's not part of the patrol. Where the hell did she come from?" Chloe stepped in. "She's one of ours. She's not even cleared." I said she's one of ours, because she recognized it in the girl's eyes. That same fire, that same pain, the look of someone who ran toward the wrong things. Because no one else would, after the chaos settled. Chloe found her sitting outside the triage bay, hands trembling, eyes blank. Chloe sat beside her, said nothing for a while, then softly, "You remind me of someone." The girl didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. Chloe reached into her pocket, pulled out the pendant, the one with the child's drawing. She placed it in the girl's hand. "Hold on to that," she whispered. "Not because it's magic, but because when everything goes dark, sometimes the smallest things remind us who we are." The girl didn't cry. She just held it tightly, like it meant everything, and maybe it did. Asterisk. Why was she trembling? It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The kind that sits in your bones after too many nights staring at a wall, pretending the silence is sleep. Chloe stood over the map board in the command tent, eyes locked on the satellite printouts. There it was again. Checkpoint 17. That cursed stretch of asphalt where allies turned into targets and promises turned into graves. 2 missing convoys, no distress calls, no claims of responsibility, just silence. And silence was never empty. The colonel tapped a marker to the map. 3 possibilities. Roadblock, abduction, or sellout. I want eyes inside by sundown. Room fell quiet, and someone said it. Semble favor. It wasn't even a debate anymore. She didn't speak, just gave a nod and walked out. Because when the mission smelled wrong, they called her, and she never said no. Checkpoint 17 was a corpse wearing the skin of a boarder. The structures were intact, but the soul was gone. Dust clung to every surface. The radio tower blinked like a dying eye. Chloe approached on foot, cloaked in local garb, face hidden beneath a neutral scarf. Her cover was simple. Liaison, fluent, familiar. But this wasn't reconnaissance. It was a hunt, and she wasn't sure what she'd find. Inside the main post, she found 2 guards, one asleep, one pretending to read a logistics manifest in reverse. She spoke softly. "Peace upon your house." The older one looked up, squinted. "You again?" Chloe nodded. "I heard there were questions." He scoffed. "Always are, few answers." 2 convoys disappeared. He shrugged. "Convoys disappear all the time. No radio signal, no debris. No claim. That's not a disappearance. That's a message. He stiffened slightly, and that was enough. There was fear here, and fear never lies. She walked the grounds alone, looking for small things, discarded rations, drag marks in the dust, scrubbed blood on a wall, and then, behind, a fuel cache. Something odd. A small shoe, child-sized, wrong color for military. She crouched, touched it gently. Dust smeared across her fingers, but it wasn't old. It had been placed recently. She turned around, and the feeling hit her again, like in the tunnel, like in Langley. The sense that she was standing on a story no one wanted told. She whispered to no one, "What did you do?" That night, she reviewed the manifest by flashlight. Too many gaps, names that didn't match, serial numbers out of sequence. Then, a page folded into the margin. Handwritten not in English, not in Arabic. In French, she unfolded it. It was a warning. There. Using the roots for more than fuel. They say it's aid. It's not. I've seen what's inside. It was unsigned, but she recognized the handwriting. The woman from the photo. The one they'd said died in silence. She hadn't been silent. She had tried to speak, and no one listened. Until now, Chloe didn't wait for permission. She packed a med bag, a knife, and a locator. Then she walked east, into the hills past a checkpoint, following her gut, following ghosts. 10 kilometers in, she found it. An unmarked trail, tire tracks, blood, drag marks. And at the end, a cave. Inside, what she saw froze her breath. Not fuel, not weapons. People dozens, shackled, gagged, some sick, some unconscious. A trafficking route. Right under the command's nose, she stepped forward, hands raised. "I'm here to help." A boy, maybe 12, stared at her with hollow eyes and whispered, "You came," her voice cracked. "I was late, but I'm here now." She radioed command. Didn't ask, just ordered. Evac needed. 37 survivors. Location pinging now. A long pause. Then, under whose authority? "Mine," she said, and turned off the radio because authority wasn't about stripes. It was about showing up and not leaving. The evac team arrived at dawn. No questions, no protest. Just quiet professionals doing their job. Eyes lowered, hands steady. One medic leaned close to her after seeing the captives. Who the hell finds this kind of thing? She didn't answer, because some questions weren't for asking. They were for remembering. Back at base, chaos, interrogations, denials, investigations opened, and already trying to close themselves. Someone tried to suggest she had acted without clearance. Someone else hinted her report was emotional. Chloe didn't flinch. She walked into the debrief, dropped the evidence, and said, "Doubt me all you want, but ask the survivors." Then she left, because she didn't come for applause. She came for the living, and they were alive. That was enough. That night, she found the girl again, the one she'd given the pendant to. The girl sat near the canteen, sketching something on a napkin with charcoal. Chloe approached. The girl looked up, eyes brighter now, and held out the drawing. It was Chloe, standing in front of a group of rescued people. But behind her, a shadow, the shape of a city, a tunnel, a map inked in scars. Chloe stared. The girl whispered, "They said you had a map on your back." Chloe nodded. "I do. Does it hurt?" Chloe smiled softly. "Only when I remember why it's there." Why do the quiet ones carry the heaviest weight? 3 weeks passed since the discovery of the trafficking route near Checkpoint 17. Internally, the command spun it into a success story. Politicians framed it as a humanitarian save. Intelligence. Branches cited it as proof of interagency vigilance. But none of them mentioned the shoe. None of them mentioned the woman who wrote the warning and died for it. None of them mentioned Chloe. She watched it all from the sidelines. Exactly where she had started, except now. The weight she carried was no longer invisible. It had shape. It had faces. It had names. and it followed her into every debrief, every hallway, every breath. Late one night, Chloe returned to the abandoned corridor behind the motor pool, the place where she used to run in secret, training while others slept. This time, she wasn't running. She sat on the cold concrete, back against the wall, map tucked under her arm. Not a battlefield map, not strategy, just the drawing the rescued girl had given her. The one of Chloe surrounded by survivors, framed by the outline of a city and the shadow of a tunnel. She unfolded it slowly, traced each line with her fingertip. It felt more honest than any medal. It showed her as she really was, not polished or posed, but scarred, solitary, purposeful. She had been asked once why she tattooed a war on her back. Now, she understood the real answer. Not just because she didn't want to forget, but because someone had to carry the map when others refused to read it. In the weeks that followed, her orders shifted again. No formal title change, no press release, just a set of sealed envelopes, always hand-delivered. Low visibility advisory, cultural insertion oversight, unauthorized presence detection. Each one a puzzle, each one a burden, but she accepted them, because each one meant someone else might come home breathing. Not all of them did. She still read the casualty reports, still circled names, still traced patterns no one else noticed. She never told them about the nightmares, or the voices, or the moments when silence felt louder than screams. But she carried them too, like coordinates. One day, Morrison found her at the range early, before sunrise. She wasn't firing, just holding the weapon, staring down the scope, breathing. He stood beside her in silence for a long time, then finally asked, "Do you ever regret stepping forward?" She lowered the rifle. "No," she said quietly, "but I regret waiting as long as I did." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "You know, that day in the med tent, when I saw your back, I thought it was just ink, a shock, some old rebellion. I didn't realize it was a language." Chloe looked at him. "It was never for them," she said. "It was for me, so I wouldn't let myself forget who died just so I could live." He nodded slowly, then turned to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "That girl you rescued, she's applying for interpreter training." Chloe didn't respond, just smiled. A small, broken thing, but real. Time moved forward, as it always does in places like this. The seasons shifted, units rotated, wars changed names. But Chloe remained, not as a relic, but as a compass. Operators came to her now, not just for maps, but for grounding. Before they deployed, they'd find her, sit beside her in silence, ask for guidance, but never too directly. She'd offer only what she could. Sometimes it was tactical, sometimes it was emotional. Once, a young medic asked her what to do if she couldn't save someone. Chloe looked at her and said softly, "You don't have to carry their death, but you do have to honor their fight." And the girl nodded, tears in her eyes, because she understood. Then came the final letter. Plain envelope, unmarked, inside. Coordinates, one name, no explanation. Chloe packed a single bag. No uniform, no weapon. Just a notebook, the pendant, and her own breath. She left quietly. No farewell. Only one person noticed. The girl she'd once rescued, now wearing a base badge and translating medical terms on a clipboard. She watched Chloe disappear into the transport, then whispered, "She came when no one else did." And maybe that was enough. Years later, stories would circulate about a woman with a war etched on her back, who walked into enemy lines alone, who turned entire missions by whispering the right word in the right language. No one could prove where she came from. No one knew her real rank. Some said she was a ghost, a myth, a moral someone invented to make sense of a broken system. But every now and then, a rescued child would draw her. Same figure, same presence, always silent, always watching. And in the end, when the noise finally stopped, her legacy wasn't Carved into plaques or databases, it was carried in the quiet resilience of those she saved. It lived in the girl who applied to serve, in the team that trusted a stranger in the tunnel, in the commanders who now paused before dismissing the quiet one at the back of the room, because they'd learned, sometimes strength doesn't roar, sometimes leadership doesn't speak, sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself. It simply acts and leaves everything different in its wake.